Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Miller's Crossing 1990 Movie Review. Miller's Crossing is a 1990 American neo-noir gangster film written, directed, and produced by Joel and Ethan Coen, and starring Gabriel Byrne, Marcia Gay Harden, John Turturro, John Polito, J.E. Freeman, and Albert Finney. The plot concerns a power struggle between two rival gangs and how the protagonist Tom Byrne plays both sides against each other. The film premiered at the 1990 New York Film Festival, and received a limited release in the United States on September 22, 1990. Though a commercial disappointment, it was acclaimed by critics. In 2005, Time chose Miller's Crossing as one of the 100 greatest films made since the inception of the periodical. In 1929, Tom Regan is the right-hand man for Irish mobster Leo O'Bannon, a political boss who runs an unnamed U.S. city during Prohibition. Leo sets off a mob war when he extends protection to his girlfriend Verna's brother, a bookie named Bernie Birnbaum, who is skimming off the match-fixing scheme of Leo's rival, the Italian mafioso Johnny Casper. The situation is further complicated by the fact that behind Leo's back, Verna is also sleeping with Tom. Despite his own relationship with Verna, Tom presses Leo to give up her brother to Casper. When the war heats up, with an assassination attempt on Leo, Tom tries to persuade Leo that he is foolish to protect Bernie on Verna's behalf, making the point by revealing his affair with her. Leo publicly beats Tom and cuts ties with both him and Verna. Cast out and needing work, Tom turns to Casper. As a loyalty test, Casper commands Tom to kill Bernie, an awkward request given Tom's relationship with Bernie's sister. With Casper's henchmen in tow, Tom leads Bernie to his execution in the woods at a spot called Miller's Crossing. Bernie grovels for his life and desperately begs Tom not to kill him. Tom fakes the killing by firing his gun into the ground and orders Bernie to leave town. Casper's henchmen, who are within earshot but cannot see the two men, are fooled and neglect to check for the body before leaving with Tom. With Leo weakened, Casper takes his place as city boss, controlling the police and using them to destroy Leo's operations. Within Casper's gang, there is tension between Tom and Casper's trusted enforcer, the brutal Eddie Dane, the Dane. Upon learning that his men did not actually see Tom kill Bernie, the Dane takes Tom back to Miller's Crossing to verify that Bernie's body is there. Tom expects to find no corpse and to be executed for it, but instead the group finds a decomposing body that had been shot in the face and disfigured beyond recognition by birds. The Dane and his men assume the body is that of Bernie, but it is actually that of the Dane's lover Mink, whom Bernie had secretly killed and placed as a decoy where his own body should have been. Tom is now vulnerable if the Dane or Casper discovers the identity of the body, a fact that Bernie uses in an attempt to blackmail Tom into killing Casper. With Bernie supposedly dead, someone continues to cut into Casper's match fix, and Tom and the Dane each try to convince Casper that the other is behind it. Tom uses Mink's sudden disappearance to sow suspicion about the Dane by insinuating that Mink has gone into hiding after he and the Dane betrayed Casper. Casper must decide between Tom and the Dane, a dilemma he resolves by shooting the Dane in the head as Tom looks on. Tom then thins out his rivals by engineering a surprise meeting between Bernie and Casper, knowing that the first one to be seen by the other is likely to be killed. Shortly after the arranged time, Tom arrives to discover that Bernie has killed Casper. Tom tricks Bernie into surrendering his gun and declares his intent to kill him in retribution for his blackmail. Bernie again begs for mercy, but Tom rejects his plea and shoots and kills him. With Casper and the Dane dead, Leo resumes his post as the only boss in town. At Bernie's burial, Verna, now back in Leo's good graces, reacts coldly to Tom and walks back to her car. Leo notifies Tom that Verna has proposed to marry him. He offers Tom his job back, but Tom turns him down and stays behind, watching Leo as he walks away. While writing the screenplay, the Coen brothers tentatively titled the film The Big Head, their nickname for Tom Regan. The first image they conceived was that of a black hat coming to rest in a forest clearing. Then, a gust of wind lifts it into the air, sending it flying down an avenue of trees. This image closes the film's opening credit sequence. Because of the intricate, dense plot, the Coen suffered from writer's block with the script. They stayed with a close friend of theirs at the time, William Preston Robertson in St. Paul, Minnesota, hoping that a change of scenery might help. After watching the romantic comedy Baby Boom one night, they returned to New York City and wrote Barton Fink, in 3 weeks, before resuming the Miller's Crossing screenplay. The budget was reported by film industry magazines as around $14 million, but the Coens have said that the film cost substantially less than that. According to Paul Coughlin, the casting of Byrne allows for the psychological assurance, self-confidence and icy demeanor to be physically reproduced in the sturdy and unruffled presence of the tall and lean actor. Tom is a man who walks behind a man, whispers in his ear, he is the brains behind Leo's operation, and he is the heartless center of Miller's Crossing. Although Byrne was a native Irishman playing a lieutenant to an Irish mobster, the Coens did not originally want him to use his own accent in the film. Byrne argued that his dialogue was structured in such a way that it was a good fit for his accent, and after he tried it the Coens agreed. During casting they had envisioned Trey Wilson, who played Nathan Arizona in their previous film Raising Arizona, as Irish gang boss Leo Obanon, but 2 weeks before principal photography began, Wilson died from a brain hemorrhage and Finney was cast. Roger Westcomb calls Finney's portrayal of Leo perfectly nuanced in a brilliant performance. Finney also appears in a cameo, as an elderly female ladies' room attendant. The Coens cast family and friends in minor roles. Director Sam Raimi, a friend of the Coens, appears as the snickering gunman at the Siege of the Sons of Erin social club, while Frances McDormand, Joel's wife, appears as the mayor's secretary. The role of the Swede was written for Peter Stormare, but he was busy playing Hamlet, a role often referred to as the Dane. J.E. Freeman was cast and the name of the character was changed to the Dane, while Stormare went on to be featured in Fargo and The Big Lebowski. The city in which the story takes place is unidentified, but the film was shot in New Orleans, as the Coen brothers were attracted to its look. Ethan Coen commented in an interview, "There are whole neighborhoods here of nothing but 1929 architecture. New Orleans is sort of a depressed city, it hasn't been gentrified. There's a lot of architecture that hasn't been touched, storefront windows that haven't been replaced in the last 60 years." Principal photography ran from January 27 to April 28, 1989. Shooting locations included the International House Hotel, as the Shenandoah Club, McGehee School, as the exterior of Johnny Casper's house, and Gallier Hall. The titular Miller's Crossing was filmed at a forest plantation near Hammond. Christopher Orr sees the opening scene, in which Johnny Casper, John Polito, confronts Leo Obanon, Albert Finney, and Tom Reagan, Gabriel Byrne, as an obvious nod to the opening of The Godfather. Roger Westcomb finds the title sequence of a fedora being blown off its bed of fallen leaves in the forest to be a subtle homage to Jean-Pierre Melville's crime film Les Doulas, 1962, which ends with the gangster protagonist's fate underlined wistfully by the shot of his fedora coming to rest, alone in the frame, in the soil of the forest floor. Miller's Crossing quotes many gangster films and films noir. Many situations, characters, and dialogue are derived from the work of Dashiell Hammett, particularly his 1931 novel The Glass Key. There are some parallels between the two stories and many scenes and lines are lifted from this novel. The relationship between Tom and Leo in the film mirrors the relationship between Ned Beaumont and Paul Madvig, the principal characters of the Hammett novel. Another important Hammett source was his 1929 novel Red Harvest, which details the story of a gang war in a corrupt Prohibition-era American city, a war initiated by the machinations of the main character. While Miller's Crossing follows the plot and main characters of The Glass Key fairly closely, the film has no direct scenes, characters, or dialogue from Red Harvest except for using a fixed boxing fight as a plot device. Orr also notes, the ending of Miller's Crossing makes even clearer reference to the immaculate final scene of The Third Man, a funeral, a protagonist abandoned by his car, who watches as the last person he cares for in the world walks away down a dirt road hemmed by trees. Miller's Crossing opened in limited release in New York City on September 22, 1990, after premiering at the New York Film Festival the day before. On initial release, the film was a box office failure at the time, making slightly more than $5 million, out of its $10 to $14 million budget. On review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 93% based on 71 reviews, with an average rating of the website's critical consensus reads, though possibly more notable for its distinctive style than an airtight story, this Coen brothers' take on the classic gangster flick features sharp dialogue, impressive cinematography, and a typically quirky cast of characters. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 76 out of 100, indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of C- on an to F scale. Film critic David Thompson calls the film a superb, languid fantasia on the theme of the gangster film that repays endless viewing. Of Turturro's performance he says, "This could be the finest work of one of our best supporting actors." Roger Ebert gave it 3/4 stars, stating, "It is likely to be most appreciated by movie lovers who will enjoy its resonance with films of the past." Frank Marcia says, "Gabriel Byrne does an excellent job in this film lives and dies on his performance." Cahiers du Cinema ranked Miller's Crossing at number 2 on its annual top 10 list for 1991. In 2005, Time chose Miller's Crossing as one of the 100 greatest films made since the inception of the periodical. Time critic Richard Corliss called it a noir with a touch so light, the film seems to float on the breeze like the frisbee of a fedora sailing through the forest. Total Film also placed it in their top 100 list in 2013. In 2010, The Guardian called it the 24th best crime movie of all time. Taking particular note of the work of cinematographer Barry Sonnenfeld and production designer Dennis Gassner, The Atlantic's Christopher Orr observed in 2024, Miller's Crossing is an aesthetic pleasure of the highest order on nearly every level. The score was written by Carter Burwell, his third collaboration with the Coen brothers. The main theme is based on the Irish folk ballad Lament for Limerick. Burwell takes a traditional piece of music with some culturally relevant connection and uses it as the central motif of the broader arrangement. The main theme has been utilized in trailers for a number of other films, including The Shawshank Redemption, as well as in an ad for Caffrey's Irish Ale. The soundtrack includes jazz tunes, such as King Porter's Stomp, reflective of the era in which the film is set. Other songs include Danny Boy, sung by Frank Patterson, an Irish tenor, which is heard in Leo's house. Patterson can also be heard singing Jimmy Cammel's Goodnight Sweetheart in a scene in the Shenandoah Club. I wrote a review of the Coen brothers' third feature, Miller's Crossing, 1990, soon after it was first released. I loved this dense, richly textured homage to the classic gangster movie at the center of which is an enigma. The plot is complex and endlessly twisty as it revolves around a character who expresses almost nothing. He keeps his feelings so tamped down that we can never be sure why he does what he does, or even at times just what it is that he's doing. For me, everything abruptly came into focus with the film's final shot. It suddenly all made sense. I sent that review to Film Quarterly and in due time received a polite and thoughtful rejection, the gist of which was that finding such a key is a dubious critical step, that it's unreliable and reductive. And yet, 30-odd years later, and almost 2 decades since I last watched Miller's Crossing, on DVD, I find it happening all over again. I can follow the story's events more easily because I've been here before, but that final shot still tells me something which clarifies, and in a sense explains, what has happened. This is the opposite of that final shot in Citizen Kane, 1941, which purports to explain the life and personality of Charles Foster Kane, but explains nothing and makes a joke of the quest to understand the man. Should I distrust my own intuition? I haven't come across other reviews which offer the same interpretation, so perhaps my own mind, emerging from the Coen's feverish tragicomedy, has invented this apparent insight out of thin air. But then composer Carter Burwell, in an interview on Criterion's new Blu-ray, makes a comment about his approach to the score which suggests he saw exactly what I see. There's no way to dig into this without talking about specifics of the film's plot and themes which might be considered spoilers, so reader beware. Miller's Crossing marked a major development in the Coen brothers' filmmaking. Their first feature, Blood Simple, 1984, was a tight, ferocious, low-budget neo-noir which channeled Jim Thompson better than any actual adaptation of his novels. Their follow-up, Raising Arizona, 1987, was a broadly comic mash-up of genres barely held together by a screwball plot. But Miller's Crossing is bigger, evoking Golden Age studio movies rather than the independent fringe. Although it is still playing with genre, it has formal qualities which give it an elegance absent from the earlier, scrappier movies. In a way, this makes it harder to read, because beneath the elegance there is still a feeling of comic irreverence. Are the Coens mocking the classic gangster genre, or embracing it and repurposing its tropes, deconstructing something familiar to reveal or create something new? The brothers say that their script owes a lot to the stories of Dashiell Hammett, both in terms of the narrative itself and in the manner of its telling. They avoid providing interior information. We only know the characters through their words and actions, neither of which give the audience a reliable idea of what is happening. In this tale of gangsters and gang war, of political corruption and the intersection of individual self-interest and social conflict, as viewers we react to seemingly familiar incidents without necessarily knowing what the actual motives behind them are. The characters talk about, and are perpetually concerned with, loyalty. These gangsters have a code which supposedly defines their behavior, but being flawed people, their reality fails to live up to their ideals. In the opening scene, which echoes the beginning of The Godfather 1972, Italian boss Johnny Casper, John Polito, petitions the more powerful Irish boss Leo O'Bannon, Albert Finney, for redress of a perceived wrong. Casper keeps returning to the issue of ethics as he explains that Bernie Birnbaum, John Turturro, has been interfering with Casper's betting on fixed fights, cutting into his take. But Bernie is under Leo's protection because the latter is romantically involved with Bernie's sister Verna, Marcia Gay Harden. He refuses to sanction Bernie's death, thus initiating fractures in the uneasy balance of power between the gangs. Leo's advisor and fixer Tom Reagan, Gabriel Byrne, tells him he should give Bernie up in order to maintain the peace, but Leo puts his personal loyalty before the code. The path to a war between the Italians and the Irish is set. Things are further complicated by the fact that Tom is also having an affair with Verna, a betrayal of the boss to whom he otherwise shows unwavering loyalty. Once someone ends up dead, Leo's man Rug Daniels, Salvatore H. Tornabene, bumped off in an alley. The violence escalates, with Tom caught in the middle. It all gets very complicated before Leo's enemies are defeated, and we see that Tom has played the gangs against one another like Toshiro Mifune in Yojimbo, 1961. Underlying the mechanics of the gang war is a depiction of male fragility, all the rules, the code, the ethics existing in order to protect the egos of these gangsters. Visually, one of the symbols used to increasingly comic effect is hats. They come off, they're pulled down low over the eyes, they're grabbed by the wind. Casper, perpetually concerned with his own status, is always suspicious that everyone else is giving him the high hat, asserting their dominance, putting him down. These suspicions provoke him to violence, striking out to reassert his masculine authority. These hats act as both shields and containers, protecting their wearers from insult while simultaneously holding in volatile, destabilizing emotions. The Coens, however, insist that a hat is just a hat. Issues of masculinity shape the characters' personal as well as professional lives. Tom's betrayal of Leo with Verna causes a seemingly irrevocable rift, although it eventually leads to the destruction of Casper's gang and the restoration of Leo's position as the man who runs the town. Their emotional triangle is reflected in a second triangle, one involving three men, which is key to unraveling the web of conflicts tearing the town apart. Casper's lieutenant, the Dane, J.E. Freeman, is involved with Mink, Steve Buscemi, who in turn has something going with Bernie. This triad needs to be destroyed before stability is regained, but it points towards that revelation which I see in the film's final moments. At the funeral for Bernie, whose death at the start might have spared everyone all the subsequent conflict and violence, Leo tells Tom that he's going to marry Verna, and as they walk away from him, Tom watches them go, pushes his hat down hard over his forehead as if clamping a lid on his own feelings, and the camera dollies in as he tilts his head and his eyes stare out from under the brim, weighted with what appears to be a deep sense of loss and melancholy. But it's not Verna he's lost, it's Leo. It seems that all he's done, all the plotting and maneuvering to save Leo from his own poor decisions, has been done out of an unexpressed, unrequited love. Everything Tom has done to manipulate and guide the action makes sense and takes on a sense of agency when seen in this light. That final look in Tom's eyes carries the weight of the film, the cost to himself of all he's done for the object of his desire, which has nonetheless been irrevocably lost to him as a consequence of his actions. And yet, if you search Miller's Crossing gay subtext, you get a lot of hits referring to the Dane-Mink-Bernie triad, but little or nothing mentioning Tom. The Coens have mentioned in interviews the mirroring of the gay triangle and the heterosexual triangle, Tom, Verna, Leo, but the question of why Tom would risk so much to have a relationship with his boss's mistress, a woman he actually doesn't seem to have any particular feelings for, isn't addressed. Could it simply be that Verna is the closest he can come to having a physical relationship with Leo? Not to mention her unfaithfulness with him seems likely to provoke rejection from Leo, thus removing Tom's rival. Although nowhere in the disc extras is any of this acknowledged by the Coens or the actors, Carter Burwell mentions that as he was trying to find the musical tone he needed for the score, he settled on the idea that this was a romance between Tom and Leo, an idea which unsettled the Coens until they actually heard the score. Woven through the Irish airs, which could so easily have seemed parodic, is a thread of romantic melancholy which works perfectly with the somber visuals and the generally understated performances. Polito and Turturro are the big exceptions, the former going large to compensate for suspicions of inadequacy, the latter as an expression of absolute self-confidence which is toxic, to give the film its distinctive tone, neither parody nor pastiche, but rather a romantic tragicomedy which uses the tropes of the gangster movie to explore a particular type of masculinity. Miller's Crossing poses some problems for a digital transfer, much of it takes place in underlit interiors and night exteriors, and the color palette is predominantly muted greens and browns, giving it a slightly oppressive, murky look. The notes on the release say that this is a 2K transfer from the original negative, but it doesn't specify when and how the transfer was made. It actually looks very similar to the 2011 Fox Blu-ray release, rather than a brand new transfer. The audio is fine, giving clarity to the thickly accented dialogue and Burwell's haunting score. One thing not noted anywhere on the release is that, as with an earlier release of Blood Simple, the Coens have tinkered with the editing. This version runs some 2 minutes shorter than the theatrical version seen on previous discs. I'm not sure what all these trims consist of. The only one I really noticed was the deletion of Frankie, Mike Starr's perplexed verbal response when Tom hits him over the head with a chair, "Jesus, Tom," before leaving the room to get help with beating Tom up. It doesn't much alter the scene, but does eliminate a tiny character detail. The temptation filmmakers have to keep tinkering with their work is understandable, and this certainly doesn't rise to the level of George Lucas's butchery of THX 1138 and the original Star Wars, but it would be appreciated if they could be open about it. Apart from a featurette cut from interviews recorded at the time of release, 1349, the disc includes almost 2 hours of new interviews and conversations. Writer Megan Abbott discusses with Joel and Ethan Coen the influence of noir films, but more extensively novels, on the movie, 28:44, and with Byrne and Turturro the characters and how the actors worked with the Coens to create them, 32:23. Barry Sonnenfeld talks about achieving the film's elegant look, 15:12, Dennis Gassner discusses the design and New Orleans locations, 10:02, and composer Carter Burwell and music editor Todd Casso talk about the use of music in Coen Brothers movies, 1641. The Room. I keep thinking about the room. The office from which Leo pulls the strings that control the city. Leo, played by Albert Finney, is a large, strong man in late middle age, and he lacks confidence in only one area. He is not sure he can count on the love of Verna, the young dame he's fallen for. That causes him to hesitate when he knows that Verna's brother, Bernie, should be rubbed out. He doesn't want to lose Verna. And his hesitation brings the city's whole criminal framework crashing down in blood and violence. But I think about the room. What a wonderful room. All steeped in dark shadows, with expensive antique oak furniture and leather chairs and brass fittings and vast spaces of flooring between the yellow pools of light. I would like to work in this room. A man could get something done in this room. And yet the room is a key to why Miller's Crossing is not quite as successful as it should be, why it seems like a movie that is constantly aware of itself, instead of a movie that gets on with business. I do not really think that Leo would have such an office. I believe it is the kind of office that would be created by a good interior designer with contacts in England, and supplied to a rich lawyer. I am not sure a rackets boss in a big American city in 1929 would occupy such a space, even though it does set him off as a sinister presence among the shadows. I am also not sure that the other characters in this movie would inhabit quite the same clothing, accents, haircuts, and dwellings as we see them in. This doesn't look like a gangster movie, it looks like a commercial intended to look like a gangster movie. Everything is too designed. That goes for the plot and the dialogue, too. The dialogue is well written, but it is indeed written. We admire the prose rather than the message. People make threats, and we think about how elegantly the threats are worded. Miller's Crossing comes from two traditions that sometimes overlap, the gangster movie of the 1930s and the film noir of the 1940s. It finds its characters in the first and its visual style in the second, but the visuals lack a certain stylish tackiness that film noir sometimes had. They're in good taste. The plot is as simple as an old gangster movie, but it takes us a long time to figure that out, because the first half hour of the film involves the characters in complicated dialogue where they talk about a lot of people we haven't met, and refer to a lot of possibilities we don't understand. It's the kind of movie you have to figure out in hindsight. Don't get me wrong. There is a lot here to admire. Albert Finney is especially good as Leo, the crime boss, and John Polito is wonderful as Johnny Casper, his rival, who keeps talking about business ethics. One of the most interesting characters in the movie is Bernie Birnbaum, John Turturro, a two-timing bookie who pleads for his life in a monologue that he somehow keeps afloat long past any plausible dramatic length. The pleasures of the film are largely technical. It is likely to be most appreciated by movie lovers who will enjoy its resonance with films of the past. What it doesn't have is a narrative magnet to pull us through a storyline that makes us really care what happens, aside from the elegant but mechanical manipulations of the plot. The one human moment comes when Leo finds out Verna really can't be trusted. Even then, I was thinking about Farewell, My Lovely, where a big mug named Moose finds out the same thing about a dame named Velma. Miller's Crossing may or may not be the Coen brothers' best movie. I think that argument exists to be made, but it's hard to get all the way through it with Barton Fink and Fargo over there in the corner, flexing their muscles. It is, though, almost certainly their most elaborate and dense movie, both as a narrative and a character study. I have found it uniformly necessary to see Coen movies twice to fully suss out everything they have going on in terms of mood, symbol, and theme, but Miller's Crossing is unique in that it took me 2 tries just to understand what was happening in the story. There is and has always been a subset of critics that view this complexity as a blind, disguising what is ultimately just a particularly elegant genre riff without much meat on its bones, and that's not a completely baseless accusation. Certainly one of the reasons that the film is extra hard to parse is entirely a function of how much of a genre film it is. It's something of a mashup of Prohibition-era storytelling with 80s American indie filmmaking, though this film, the Coens' third, was their most studio-bound to that point, and the most obvious element of a very idiosyncratic screenplay is a exuberant passion for 20s slang used in a way that's not exactly period correct, but is also much too brittle and artificial for it to come across as in any way timeless or fresh, no more in the 2010s than at its debut in 1990. The most useful way to think of it, in my estimation, is not as a faithful recreation of a vintage gangster picture, nor as a faithful, and uncredited, adaptation of Dashiell Hammett's 1929 novel Red Harvest and 1930's The Glass Key. It's not really faithful in either of those capacities, but as something like a performance piece based on those ideas. It is a wildly artificial, mediated thing. Nobody has ever talked or acted like this in reality, nor even in any other movie. Perhaps the right way to describe it is as pageantry, an act of recreating the idea of a gangster story in a way that calls maximum attention to the artifice of it. Other Coen films function in a similar way, as heavily abstracted ideas of a genre film rather than an actual version of a genre film, especially early on. The Hudsucker Proxy, from 1994, is the other clearest example of this tendency, but Miller's Crossing is probably the film where this trick pays the most dividends. It is to a great degree a film about performance, for its central character is a man whose entirely personality is mostly a matter of what he chooses to show to other people, and the somewhat arch brittleness of the whole exercise is a good context for that character to exist in. That's another point of distinction. Miller's Crossing was the first Coen film that was primarily a character study, though like everything else about the film, it's not immediately apparent that this is the case. But what else do you call a movie in which every scene but one is told from the perspective of one man, Tom Regan, Gabriel Byrne, in what is by miles and miles the best performance I've ever seen of his, and whose final shot openly invites us to apply what we've learned about him to a stunningly enigmatic expression on his face. It's a character study through and through, and that's not even the weird part. It's also a love story in which the same man devotes all his energy to protecting, destroying, and redeeming the only human being for whom he feels any demonstrated kind feeling. But we'll get there in a minute. Miller's Crossing is, at its simplest, a Red Harvest-esque tale of a gang war, in which the vivacious Irish mobster Leo O'Bannon, Albert Finney, decides against the strenuous suggestions of Tom, his closest advisor and seeming best friend, not to let the Italian gang leader Johnny Casper, John Polito, kill a chiseling Jewish bookie, Bernie Birnbaum, John Turturro. This is in part because Leo doesn't want to let the uppity Casper get his way. It's also because Bernie's sister Verna, Marcia Gay Harden, a noted piece of bad news, is currently sleeping with Leo, and making him awfully happy. Once Tom fails to keep things from escalating, he splits with Leo and joins up with Casper, apparently in the hope of entrenching himself high up in the trust of the city's new mob boss, but it's immediately clear that whatever game Tom's playing, Casper's success and well-being are of only incidental concern. There's so much going on in the script, in the performances, and in the aesthetic that it's almost impossible to synthesize it all into one simple reading, so I won't pretend that any of what I'm about to say is definitive, but to me, Miller's Crossing is above all about Tom's love for Leo, which doesn't necessarily have a homoerotic tint to it at all, though that's certainly a common enough reading among academic critics. Certainly, Miller's Crossing is unusually concerned with homosexuality, with three men identified as being involved in a destructive love triangle, the centrally problematic Bernie among them, and the word queer appearing in the dialogue far too often for it to simply be for period color. After all, while queer simply meant odd and dysfunctional in the 30s, by 1990 it had definitively transitioned into a synonym for not heterosexual nor traditional gendered. If the word was merely peppered in for flavor, like plenty of other archaism, there'd be no point in digging in further, but queer is used a lot in Miller's Crossing. It is easily the most common obsolete slang term in dialogue. And with the obvious foregrounding of the gay supporting characters, which could simply be seen as literalising the coded homosexuals in movies like The Maltese Falcon or The Big Combo, in concert, it's really hard to doubt that the Coens meant for the audience to have gayness much on their mind in watching Miller's Crossing. None of which proves, or even implies, that Tom is lusting after Leo, or that his affair with Verna is sublimating his desire to sleep with Leo, though that's a fine and durable reading. What it does absolutely demand is that we look at the film and see in it a muddying of gender constructs, and this is certainly something that we can see in Tom, right there on the surface. Compared to the usual gangster picture or film noir hero, he's not very masculine. One of his defining traits is a tendency to be badly beaten in any physical altercation, even those with old men and women, not least because he typically doesn't even move to defend himself. He's a spectacularly incongruous figure in the hard-boiled surroundings, with people spouting out florid lines of dialogue that verge on self-parody, and multiple people dying in wide-eyed, unblinking machine gun barrages. He's passive, thoughtful, the only character who both thinks clearly and comes to the right conclusions, soft-spoken, and turned off by violence, none of them tough guy movie hero tropes, and certainly none of them shared by the other straight men in the movie. Even Verna, the only prominent women, and 2 of the 3 gay men act in more traditionally male ways than Tom does. This leaves him a dislocated protagonist, genderless and sensitive and physically weak in a genre that is one of the most quintessential masculine in the history of American film, doubly so if we allow that this is as much a noir pastiche as a gangster film pastiche. It is a universe which Tom can manipulate more easily than any other character, filling the role of a seer or wise man or God among the rest of the cast. The much repeated phrase Jesus, Tom is irresistible in suggesting that he is in but not of the world he walks in, but it is also a universe where he doesn't fit and isn't happy. Leo is a protective figure and focus of Tom's kindly feelings, prospective lover, prospective father, prospective friend. It's largely immaterial. Leo is the thing that enables Tom to function well in this environment, and he repays Leo with all of his love. The tragedy of the thing, and it depends a lot on how one reads the hugely ambiguous final scene, but it fits my interpretation, is that by fully giving himself over to Leo, Tom enables the exact unconscious betrayal by Leo that leaves him without a home or meaning in the end. It's a sign of how much Miller's Crossing has going on that I can have wandered about for that many words and said so little about so much of it. Not even a word about the exquisite craftsmanship. That includes an absolutely perfect opening scene that rivals only the mini-movie at the start of Raising Arizona as my favorite sequence in the Coen filmography, a perfectly timed tour of Polito's sweaty anxiety and Finney's blunt authority. Both men are terrific throughout the film, but at their best in this scene, introducing Tom slowly and methodically, the sound design guiding our attention with laser precision, the dialogue warming up the film's strange vocabulary, plunging us into it. But not without a GUIDE map, the driving editing by the film's namesake, Michael R. Miller. I believe this was the last Coen film that the brothers did not edit themselves. The Carter Burwell score is hands down my favorite of his many glorious Coen soundtracks, drawing from Irish folk music, traditional Hollywood, and Italian influences to tell the entire emotional story in a way that you can follow without any other cues. And Barry Sonnenfeld's luminous cinematography is both beautiful and psychologically flawless, depicting the claustrophobic city with menacing but chiaroscuro-free shadows, and reaching masterpiece-level work in the nightmare setting of the eponymous woods, a hazy place of flatness and danger that deliberately quotes the conformist without in any way copying it. It was his second-to-last project as director of photography, before jumping into the director's chair, and as much as I love some of his movies, and despise others, Miller's Crossing is all the evidence we need to know what a fantastic alternate career was cut short. It is, if I may crudely try to wrap things up, the most thoroughly inexhaustible movie the Coens have ever made. It says less about humanity than Fargo, explores the boundaries of cinema less than Barton Fink, and is less altogether flawless than No Country for Old Men, but I'd reach for it ahead of any of them. It is complex and deep and slow to reveal its secrets, but I have consistently been thrilled to do the work necessary to pull them out, and am wholly content to call this my favorite, if that has any value, among all the Coen's films. The plot concerns a power struggle between 2 rival gangs and how the protagonist, Tom Regan, plays both sides against each other. I have seen this plot multiple times before in a gangster flick, and although it was well executed here, I did not get anything fresh, new, or particularly sophisticated to think about. The Byrne scenes are the best ones as they are so well executed and highly realistic. The struggle of the protagonist to pit these sides against one another was also well realized, and there were some potent, dramatic, and intense scenes to be found in that regard. However, the storyline is mostly standard and again not really all that clever. The dialogue is good, but far from amazing as critics usually pinpoint when discussing this film. The movie is not that well paced, and it is really a movie about nothing as thematically speaking it's both thin and non-existent in message. Thus, I simply did not care, and I also was never emotionally invested whatsoever. The performances are the best thing about this movie. Gabriel Byrne is very good in the main role and Tom is the best written character of the bunch. John Turturro stole the show in the role of Byrne and he is very memorable. Others are far less interesting, though Albert Finney himself was quite good. Miller's Crossing is also famous for its cinematography, which is definitely strong, but I was by no means blown away by it. The forest scenes are uniformly excellent and the positioning of the trees in some shots and takes was quite inspired, but otherwise the movie is straightforward in its photography. The same goes for the entire movie. The outdoor scenes are great, but others not so much. The direction is weak and the movie is yet another Coen Brothers flick that I simply did not care about. It's not bad of course, but it is not that great either. The Coen Brothers' third cinematic release may be classified as my 7th all-time favorite film of theirs, but make no mistake, there are 6 incredible films before Miller's Crossing on their all-time roll call of greatness, and this noir gangster tale was very definitely their first stone-cold classic. Blood Simple in 1984 was a mightily impressive debut film, and Raising Arizona 3 years later isn't as great as many would have you believe, but their third film Miller's Crossing is, and although only 7th on my all-time list, this was their first bona fide classic. I've made it my cinematic life's work to be obsessed with the mad filmmaking brothers from Minnesota, and I remain rather proud of the Opus blog article below that catalogues their first 32 years in the art of film and their 17 films released between 1984 and 2016. It's crammed full with obsessional love, and should you take a peek at this lengthy article I'd be honored. Alternatively, and assuming you're here for my rambling musings on the incredible performances of Marcia Gay Harden, John Polito, Albert Finney, Gabriel Byrne, as well as John Turturro stealing every scene as he so often does, here is my near-decades-old appraisal of the Coen brothers' first film for the ages. An immediate favorite film of the Coen brothers, every rewatch is a joy as a stellar all-time cast comprising of Gabriel Byrne, John Turturro, Albert Finney, Marcia Gay Harden, John Polito and Steve Buscemi conspire to bring the brothers' brilliant screenplay to life. A noir gangster film set in a 1920s/1930s American town, the conflict between various warring factions is brutally depicted, as are the varying dualities of the wonderful characters brought to life. Each seemingly has a duality, an unnerving side to them, and all main characters are richly layered. Opening with a long scene of Leo, Albert Finney, a local mafia crime boss determined to show his latest adversary Casper, John Polito, who really runs and controls the town. Aided on each side by loyal lieutenants Tom, Gabriel Byrne, a consigliere to mafia boss Leo, and Dane, J.E. Freeman, loyal to Casper, beautifully shot by returning director of photography Barry Sonnenfeld, the scene is well and truly set. Cutting to the opening credits against the beautiful and iconic Miller's Crossing theme from Carter Burwell, this ends with yet another iconic shot of a black hat blowing on the wind through secluded woods. Desperately in love with his boss muse Verna, a magnificent Marcia Gay Harden, we follow Tom throughout. Played brilliantly in a standout performance by Gabriel Byrne, every long lingering shot on Byrne shows a nuanced, yet quiet and measured performance. The film's moral heart, he questions his boss' antagonism and counsels against an all-out war. Still and rarely blinking, always calm amongst the storm surrounding him, his eyes are yours throughout the film. The scenes between Byrne and Finney and Byrne/Gay Harden are exceptional and the film's true highlights. As are the scenes between Byrne and John Turturro, playing gay Harden's troubled brother Byrne. One particular scene with Byrne and Turturro is yet another iconic reminder of this fantastic film, but the main scenes as described here are all simply framed and cut between the two characters, the heartbeat of the film. A true character film at heart. John Polito as Casper is outstanding as a brash, exuberant, and ambitious eccentric looking to take control of the town. Counseled by J.E. Freeman as Dane, his quiet yet powerful henchman in the background. Marcia Gay Harden is fantastic as Verna, strong and independent and desperately wanting to return the affections and run away with Byrne's Tom. But alongside Gabriel Byrne, firstly Albert Finney as Leo dominates with another star performance as a mafia boss clinging to a crumbling empire, and John Turturro as Verna's troubled brother Byrne. A masterful performance as ever from John Turturro, equally as nuanced as Byrne's portrayal of Tom. Minor cameos can also be seen from Coen brothers stalwarts Steve Buscemi and Frances McDormand, as well as Sam Raimi. Act 1 ends with the first outright violence of the film, and another iconic moment is born. A bloody shootout in a burning building, spreading to the streets, and Albert Finney, machine gun in hand and cigar in mouth, standing victorious, all accompanied by a great version of Danny Boy. Whilst a violent film about settling scores and running the illegal scenes of betting and gambling in Prohibition USA, the film's main themes of loyalty, ethics, revenge, and love are to the fore. Combined with the characters' duplicity, it's a joy of a film and rightly an iconic piece of cinematic history and of the Coen brothers' growing masterful canon of work. Writing this retrospectively and as a myopic fan of both the film and the directors, I am surprised this film did not garner any Oscar nominations or fare well in any of the respected film festival categories. 23 years on, the film remains fresh and engaging with brilliantly written characters who dominate the screen. Thanks for reading. Just for larks as always, and always a human reaction rather than spoilers galore. My 3 most recently published film articles are linked below, or there's well over 180 blog articles, with 350+ individual film reviews, within my archives from which to choose. I first watched Miller's Crossing around 2 years ago, at a time when I was not yet a big fan of the Coen brothers. I believe previous to Miller's Crossing the only other Coen brothers film I had seen was The Big Lebowski, a film I need to revisit, and while I liked Miller's Crossing a great deal, I felt that something was missing. 2 years later, I still like Miller's Crossing a great deal, but now I wonder what I ever thought was missing, because I couldn't find anything the film lacked as I sat through its near 2-hour runtime. Tom Regan knows every angle, he understands his fellow man, how he thinks, what he will do and how he will act. What he doesn't understand are games of chance and women, and in that way he is a man that all of us can identify with. Miller's Crossing is a crime drama, it is a gangster flick, it is reminiscent in ways of Yojimbo. Above all those facets, Miller's Crossing is the machinations of one man. The joy I most took away from Miller's Crossing involved Tom playing both sides against each other, the coolness that never left his mien even as another part of his plan clicked into place. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, some scenes weren't a part of his plan, but he was able to make even those moments work for him. I sat watching Dane strangle Tom and a giant smile was splayed across my face. His plan was so well worked, and at its most crucial moment he left it all up to the decision of one militant Italian. It's not just pure genius on Tom's part, it is excellent writing on the part of the Coen brothers. I remember when I first watched Miller's Crossing, the main complaint I heard towards the Coen's gangster film was the slickness of the dialogue. People wouldn't talk like this, I was told. It takes you out of the movie when they speak in dialects that have obviously been constructed on pen and paper, people drilled into my brain. I may have taken those misgivings into account after my first viewing of Miller's Crossing, but not this time. This time the voices of dissent are falling upon deaf ears. The dialogue is perhaps my favorite part of the entire film. It's like nails being driven into the wood laid for the foundation of an old-style house. Each word builds upon the previous one, you take away one and the entire text will crumble, but as they build upon one another the speech reaches a point where it is almost transcendent. The foundation isn't just solid, it's fluid, adapting and molding to whatever threatens to tear at the foundation and rock it to the ground. I'm going to take a second to talk about a smaller actor, a man who has spent his entire career as a bit player. The cast of Miller's Crossing is superb from top to bottom, but the man who impressed me the most was lifelong character actor John Polito. His Johnny Casper is like a revelation, a character so interesting that I found myself missing other happenings in scenes he was involved in. That's how much Polito pulled my attention towards him. Every actor fully clothes himself or herself in their character, but Polito is utterly brilliant as Casper. In typical Coen Brothers fashion, Miller's Crossing flips from genre to genre with ease. It is a comedy at times, a drama at others, and a crime tome at other moments. The film leans in many different directions, but it never feels like it's gone off the tracks. The genres come together for one cohesive experience. Miller's Crossing is also a beautiful film to look at. The cinematography is gorgeous, and like usual the Coens show an uncanny understanding of depth and space in their shot selection and placement of actors and objects. The bottom line is that Miller's Crossing is even better the second time around and further affirms my growing love for the oeuvre of the Coen brothers. It is an interesting film, full of rich texture and layers, with witty dialogue and tremendous performances out the wazoo. Don't be like that aimless hat blowing in the wind and miss out on Miller's Crossing, and always remember, put one in the brain. So I bought this DVD set the other day of 4 Coen Brothers movies, and I reviewed one of those the other day, Blood Simple. This was another one I hadn't seen, and is known to be another dark crime movie, so, let's check it out. Tom is a right-hand man to a mobster/political boss, Leo. Leo is ignoring the pleas of another mobster, Johnny, to root out a bad bookie who might be spoiling bets on Johnny's fixed fights. Leo defends the bookie, Bernie, because Leo is dating Bernie's sister, Verna. But guess what, Tom is also dating Verna. Oops. By dating I mean sex, so it's not like they're going to the movies together. Johnny offers Tom to switch sides because he's ready to initiate a war against Leo. Tom doesn't take it personally when Johnny has his goons try to beat him to a pulp over Tom's loyalty. In fact, he goes to Leo and begs Leo to hand Bernie over to Johnny, even admitting Tom's affair with Verna to Leo. Leo had just fought off a bunch of Johnny's goons in a gruesome way, so he's ready to go to war no matter what, and kicks Tom out of the gang. Tom goes to Johnny, and Johnny says he'll take care of Tom if Tom drives Bernie out into the woods and kills him. Tom, instead, threatens Bernie, and shoots in the air and tells Bernie to get lost and never come back to town. Johnny's ridiculously stupid gang believes that Tom has killed Bernie. They're happy, except Johnny's right-hand man, the Dane, who is a bully among bullies and probably the only reason why anything gets done around town. But, someone is still meddling with Johnny's fixed fights, and who could it be? Tom sets up these characters to handle each other in the only way they know how, brutal murder. Can he find his way into Leo and or Verna's good graces? Well, can he? This is one I'm not going to spoil even though it's 34 years old. I think you should check it out. It's engrossing, and subdued after the Coens' flashy sophomore movie Raising Arizona. Hey, wait, there's a right-hand man type who falls for the mob boss girl. And he starts playing both sides to get to the truth. Didn't we just see this movie? Tom and Leo's relationship, along with how Leo controls the mayor and police chief, is definitely influenced by Dashiell Hammett's characters the Glass Key, as well as the gang warfare in the notoriously violent Red Harvest, which I don't think was ever adapted into a movie. There's a lot of homages to other noir films, such as The End to the Third Man. The Coens must have been big on noir and pulp novels. I had seen some of their movies before, including The Big Lebowski, which made more sense, and seemed better, after a second viewing, and made even more sense after I read Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep. I don't need to know if Coen fans need to do that, but they definitely should check out these other movies and novels if these kinds of stories interest them. Anything about the cast? It features a very young John Turturro and Steve Buscemi, who must have always looked like that. Also, he's on screen a plenty, but you may not recognize one of the gunmen, Keep an eye out for Spider-Man director Sam Raimi as they shoot out one of Leo's hangouts. John Polito steals the show as Johnny Casper, in my opinion, and he'd appear in a few more Coen films. He passed away in 2016. Tommy drives his floozy's brother Bernie down to the woods at Miller's Crossing with a couple of Johnny Casper's gorillas in the jalopy, and when they get there the hoods toss Tommy a rod and tell him to take Bernie into the trees and blow his brains out. If he doesn't like it, they'll blow his brains out. He likes it? This is classic Coen Brothers, reminiscent of the murder in the plowed field in Blood Simple, when the camera wouldn't leave things alone, a voyeuristic orgy of gut-melting opportunism, brought closer by the intimacy of Bernie's terror, in a virginal setting of autumnal purity. The Coens have a view of cinema which encourages a high degree of risk, even within a populist form, such as the mobster movie, and yet guarantees touches of genius in an artifice that relies on style and detail. The city is somewhere, the year 1929, the country America. Prohibition, corruption, and protection rackets oil the wheels of local government. The mayor and police chief are in the pocket of Leo, political power broker and gang boss. Crime is autocratic, so you want him killed. For starters, controlled, you're as big as I'll let you be and don't forget it, and racist, what's one Hebrew more or less? Tommy is in with the crowd. He's Leo's confidant and lieutenant, an Irishman who watches and waits, a drinker and a thinker. Okay, let's get stinko. Let's do something else, Verna says, loosening her blouse, capable of treachery, cruelty, and duplicity, while suppressing feelings as closely as intentions. Johnny Casper is a fixer and small-time hoodlum. He doesn't like being pushed around by Leo, and he doesn't like being double-crossed by Bernie, John Turturro. Crime should be honorable, he believes, grinning like a shark. But it ain't. Which is why he has sadists, like the Dane, covering his back. On a simple level, this is the story of Casper's conflict with Leo and Verna's attempt to save her brother and Tommy's devious manipulation of fate. The language is a glorious goulash of pulp slang and inspirational invention, creating an underspeak of whiplash witticisms. If I never see him again, it'll be soon enough, and gargoyles, the last time we jawed, you gave us the hi-hat. Tommy's cold heart is a reminder that the romance of this era has nothing to do with romance. His treatment of Verna, Marcia Gay Harden, ostensibly Leo's moll, is cruel and selfish, and the way he uses people and drops them suggests the early years of a political hyena. By comparison, Leo seems sentimental and courageous, while Casper appears gullible and impetuous. The plot doesn't invite scrutiny. Tommy's inability to avoid being beaten up every 5 minutes begs the question as to why he's allowed to live so long, since he can't fight, carries no weapon, leaves his door unlocked and speaks his mind. Gabriel Byrne is enigmatic, dark and brooding, like a war poet waiting for war, while Albert Finney suggests depths of genuine compassion beneath Leo's harsh exterior, and John Polito gives a performance of comic brilliance as Casper. There are moments when the film feels like downtown Gotham City and others when it shivers with surprise. One such is the time when Tommy is taken into an empty warehouse to be ritually gone over by one of Casper's heavies. The big guy lays his jacket and hat on the side and advances quietly towards his victim, who picks up a chair and smashes him in the face with it. The thug stands there, bleeding and blubbering, before stumbling out, like a schoolboy in tears, to return with a small old man who cracks Tommy in the mouth with the speed of a prize fighter. The failure is Tommy. Nobody knows anyone, he tells Leo. Not that well. It matters, since he is the protagonist. Knowing him not that well leaves a hole at the center. The Coen's signature is the look, the sound, the season, almost the smell of it, this tight parodic dance, take your flunky and dangle, through memories of Dashiell Hammett, across wide dark rooms with stained floorboards, in the company of men who ask, if you can't trust a fix, what can you trust, witnessed by hoodlums in hats and fortified on bootleg rye. After the success of Raising Arizona, Joel and Ethan Coen were given the chance to do something a little more ambitious, with a budget of somewhere between $11 million and $15 million. They settled for a labyrinthine period gangster film loosely based on Dashiell Hammett's The Glass Key, with elements from the author's Red Harvest thrown in for good measure. Gangster movies of the 1930s were a secondary template, films Ethan referred to as dirty town movies. The first image that cemented in their heads was that of big guys in overcoats in the woods, the incongruity of urban gangsters in a forest setting. Perhaps not surprisingly, they took a while to get past this and shelved Miller's Crossing for 2 months whilst they wrote Barton Fink, ironically the tale of a screenwriter with writer's block. In the opening scene of Miller's Crossing, before the recurring dream motif of Tom's hat blowing through the titular wood to Carter Burwell's gorgeous Irish-tinged theme and the title reveal, Johnny Casper, John Polito, a mob boss ball of repressed fury, negotiates with his nominal superior Leo Obanon, Albert Finney, and his right-hand Tom Reagan, Gabriel Byrne. Here is demonstrated the other recurring motif of doublespeak and rich underworld slang tipping off on an already rigged fight goes against Casper's ethics. But Leo's not the lead, Tom is, and he doesn't even speak until after 5 minutes. He moves through the office to stand silently behind his boss as Leo turns to gauge his opinion on the matter of Casper's demand to rub out Bernie Birnbaum, John Turturro, for the aforementioned ethical divergence. The script describes his response as an almost imperceptible shrug. Tom silently expresses surprise as Leo turns Casper down. Bernie pays Leo protection. He's also the brother of his mistress, Verna, Marcia Gay Harden, who we later find out Tom is also seeing. Tom's first words as Casper and his menacing right-hand Eddie Dane, J.E. Freeman, leave are, "Bad play, Leo." Tom's loyalty, despite his personal treachery, is both his strength and weakness. "Nobody knows anybody," he tells Varma, obliquely also referring to himself. Not that well. When I read that script, I was just like anybody I think who read it, just really impressed by how visual and literate and how complex those relationships in the story actually were, Gabriel Byrne recalled. When you unravel what that movie is about, it's even more audacious that someone could base a storyline on that single conversation between Steve Buscemi's character and mine at the bottom of the staircase. All the twists and turns, the betrayals. There were certainly Machiavellian traits in the character, and as much as the film is about gangsters, it's also a film about big business and about the nature of morality. I think when the film came out it was really underrated. There's laugh-out-loud moments in that movie, whereas on paper, it didn't necessarily read that way. When Albert Finney turns around says they took his hair, Tommy. They took his hair. And of course, we'd just seen the kid run off with the guy's rug in the earlier scene. I asked the Coens what their inspiration was to write the film, and I forget whether it was Joel or Ethan who said to me, "You always see gangsters in the street, but you never see them in a forest." I just thought that was so brilliant. Plus, there's so much amazing imagery, the hat floating by the camera through the forest, which is one of the most original images in film history. The Coens were persuaded by Byrne to let him play Tom with his natural accent, which works for the story. He's an outsider, an observer, and a mover through mudded loyalties. Leo's an Irish-American mobster, Casper's Italian-American, Bernie and Verna are Jewish amongst the other slang, period epithets fly thick and fast. He won't allow Leo to pay off his mounting gambling debts to Lazar. His loyalty can't be bought, partly because of his self-disgust at cheating on him with his girl. More ethics, or simply a man who thinks if he plays the long game all will right itself in the end. He's the quintessential Hammett guy, says Joel. You're not let in on how much he knows and what exactly he's up to. He tests the other characters to see what they want and uses that to his advantage. Tom's convinced a losing streak has to end at some point of its own accord. David Thompson reflects that there are some who find Miller's Crossing too clever by half, but I think that misses how far the Gabriel Byrne character recognizes the curse of intelligence that hangs over him and the duty it imposes of always being driven to nose out the cons of others, while hoping that his own subterfuges are going unnoticed. It's kill or be killed, although Tom's a long time reluctant to get his hands dirty, and the air of life is smartness. Take it or leave it. All of the main characters are betting on chance, and the shifting tectonic power plates of mobster rule echo societal power grab politics and backroom deals. At one point, Tom enters Leo's office to find him powwowing with the mayor and police chief, a scene mirrored later when Tom finds the same pair sitting with Casper, recently installed as town boss. The heightened Depression-era setting makes it clear why everyone is most interested in self-preservation. It's why Verna gravitates towards Leo as a way of protecting her brother, Bernie, and why Tom is eager to cast off Bernie because he correctly notes Casper's tired of always getting the hi-hat, and wants more. Tom keeps things close to his chest, or under his hat, so no one ever quite knows what he's thinking. While Tom is playing both sides off each other, he questions the parlous state of his own soul, or heart. But if he can just keep his hat on his head, he's one step ahead. Look into your heart, the manipulative weasel Bernie begs of him for his life at two different points in the story. Depending on what has transpired in the overarching rumpus, he gets a different, and final, on the second occasion, answer from Tom each time. Byrne also recommended Limerick's Lamentation, to the Coens, the traditional Irish song from which Burwell built his score. Gabriel gave us a whole list of stuff, Joel said. The tone and feeling of the music seemed really appropriate to the movie, the melancholy feeling that it has. It also works as a counterpoint to the humorous undertone of the rat-a-tat lingo and wisecracks that sidle up to you just as someone gets an almighty whack to the face, or one in the brain. Even the Dane has murderous, mordant humor. It ain't elves, he cracks, when there's some dispute over who's responsible for the fixes. The film, for all its convolutions, hinges on three love triangles: Leo, Tom, and Verna, Tom, Verna, and Bernie. It's implied the siblings sleep together, and between Mink, Steve Buscemi, who appears in one scene only, given the role because he could speak the shifty lines faster than anyone else, the Dane, and Bernie. After he's been cast out by Leo, Tom sows seeds of mistrust in Casper to the Dane's disgust that Mink, the Dane's boy, is in league with Bernie to rip him off. It's part of his master plan to save the thick-headed Leo from himself, and his stubborn pride. Casper too is torn by his own self-imposed rules. The Dane knows in his black heart that Tom is fixing to double-cross, but Casper is conflicted. Yeah, double-cross once, where does it all end, he muses. An interesting ethical dilemma. Barry Sonnenfeld's camera work is classical and stately in style, the better to not distract from the complex rhythms of the dialogue. Never pan. It is boring. I never let the Coen brothers pan, was one of his rules. Miller's Crossing is set in an unspecified American city circa 1929, and the Coens specifically chose New Orleans for its untouched Jazz-age architecture. From the production notes, the pre-planning for Miller's Crossing began with 4 single-spaced pages of location descriptions written by the Coens to communicate to their early collaborators the precise look, feel and camera needs of each location in the film. The most laconic was the description of Verna's place: modest one-bedroom apartment, large living room. Verna doesn't care where she lives, and neither do we. The 1.85:1 aspect ratio frame is filled with evocative lighting, moody contrast, and natural colors that draw from a tobacco palette of earth tones, the director's series. Being a film with Irish protagonists, the color green is extremely prominent throughout, appearing in the opening titles, wall sconces, desk lamps, etc. The Coens referenced several films throughout Miller's Crossing. The opening scene with Johnny Casper and Leo evokes the beginning of The Godfather, as another smaller man pleads for intervention from the powerful boss behind the shadowed desk. The climactic forest scene references Bernardo Bertolucci's The Conformist, and the final funeral of Bernie, as a disgusted Verna takes the car and leaves Leo in the lurch, reflects the ending of The Third Man. Leo's home, which is the scene of a spectacularly composed nighttime attack by a pair of hitmen, was put together out of 4 separate locations, including North Line, a street in the Old Metairie section of town where the filmmakers blew up a car, and 2 constructed sets. The screenplay sets the scene: Leo stretched out on his bed, wearing a robe over his pajamas, smoking a cigar, listening but only to the phonograph. Its sound covers any other noise in the house. This sequence was broken down in Premiere magazine. As the sequence begins, we see Leo's just slain bodyguard, his cigarette setting his newspaper on fire. Leo doesn't hear the approaching gunman over the strains of Danny Boy. But the sight of smoke, through the cracks of the floor, alerts him. Leo dives under the bed, and the gunmen are shown from his point of view. This was shot on a stage built 3 feet off the ground, so Finney's character would be even with the camera lens. "We put squibs on Leo's mattress," says Joel. "Feathers were shot from an air gun. This shot we did twice." Leo escapes to another room, jumps from a window to the ground, and pumps bullets into the back of a gunman. "The guy from behind is Jerry Hewitt, the stunt coordinator," says Joel. "To hold the gun while it's firing, with squibs going up your back, is hard. It was a lot of fun blowing the toes off," says Joel. Adds Ethan, "What sells the hit is the dance shown in a 22 cut sequence. This scene was always going to be cut and perfectly timed to the song." The screenplay states, faintly, from another room in the house, we can hear a phonograph playing John McCormack singing Danny Boy. To emulate the incomparable McCormack, the Coens recruited Frank Patterson, known as Ireland's Golden Tenor. They directed Patterson's performance to be precisely timed with the events on screen, even if the rapid progress of the flames and Leo's bottomless drum of bullets stretches credibility. From IMDb, in the scene where Leo uses the Thompson submachine gun, he should have had to reload at least 6 times. Assuming the gun is a 1928 model, the rate of fire is 700 rounds per minute and has a 100-round can of ammunition. The gangster walks into the bedroom and fires for 5 seconds for a total of 58 shots fired. Leo takes his gun and fires at the window for 20 seconds for 233 shots fired, then Leo fires at the car for about 20 more seconds for another 233 shots fired. That is a total of 524 shots fired from one Thompson with no reload. "Albert was really cool," says Ethan. "He had to back up, hit his mark, and aim as the cartridges would eject." According to Ethan, Finney became a neighborhood favorite. After each take, they would applaud Albert, and Albert did a real elaborate curtsy in his robe and PJs. Finney was actually a last-minute replacement for the actor originally envisioned for Leo, American Trey Wilson, who'd appeared in Raising Arizona. Shortly before filming began, however, Wilson dropped dead at age 40 from a cerebral hemorrhage, and Finney found himself packing a bag for New Orleans. Mike Scott elaborates further on the night they raided Old Metairie. Harden at the time remembered Finney as a leader of the production's party contingent while in New Orleans. She would know, she, too, was part of that after-hours crew. The first thing he bought was a guide to restaurants, and he was always saying, "Look, darling, here's another one we should try," Harden told the Times-Picayune at the film's premiere. He dined at Brigtson's. He was a frequent patron of the bistro, where chef Susan Spicer worked at the time. He, Byrne and other members of the cast reportedly took in a performance of Spud McConnell's one-man show Kingfish at the Toulouse Cabaret Theatre. And nearly every Sunday, which was his day off from filming, found Finney at the fairgrounds, where he happily indulged in one of his off-camera passions, horse racing. "Here I am, the son of a bookmaker, trying to pick a winner, and there she is picking a $36 winner in her first try," Finney playfully groused on one such Sunday after one of his guests got lucky at the track. He had so much fun in town that even after his scenes were completed, he stuck around to contribute a cameo to Miller's Crossing, donning a dress to play a female attendant in a women's washroom. With such a great script and polished production, no wonder he stuck around. To paraphrase Terry McGill to Byrne's Tom, the Coens are still artists with a typewriter. Finney was actually a last-minute replacement for the actor originally envisioned for Leo, American Trey Wilson, who'd appeared in Raising Arizona. Shortly before filming began, however, Wilson dropped dead at age 40 from a cerebral hemorrhage, and Finney found himself packing a bag for New Orleans. Mike Scott elaborates further on the night they raided Old Metairie. Harden at the time remembered Finney as a leader of the production's party contingent while in New Orleans. She would know, she, too, was part of that after-hours crew. The first thing he bought was a guide to restaurants, and he was always saying, "Look, darling, here's another one we should try," Harden told the Times-Picayune at the film's premiere. He dined at Brigtson's. He was a frequent patron of the bistro, where Chef Susan Spicer worked at the time. He, Byrne and other members of the cast reportedly took in a performance of Spud McConnell's one-man show Kingfish at the Toulouse Cabaret Theatre. And nearly every Sunday, which was his day off from filming, found Finney at the fairgrounds, where he happily indulged in one of his off-camera passions, horse racing. Here I am, the son of a bookmaker, trying to pick a winner, and there she is picking a $36 winner in her first try, Finney playfully groused on one such Sunday after one of his guests got lucky at the track. He had so much fun in town that even after his scenes were completed, he stuck around to contribute a cameo to Miller's Crossing, donning a dress to play a female attendant in a women's washroom. With such a great script and polished production, no wonder he stuck around. To paraphrase Terry McGill to Byrne's Tom, the Coens are still artists with a typewriter. For this series I wanted to take a look back at the Coen brothers' impressive and extensive filmography. Before they were Oscar winners and considered two of the best in the business, only rivaled by the likes of Scorsese or Tarantino. The Coen brothers have always been top-notch filmmakers, always creating memorable characters, and imaginative stories, whether it be dramatic, comedic, or a little of both. The Coens have always had a gift for the craft, and Miller's Crossing is no exception. Coming out in 1990 makes Miller's Crossing only the third feature film from the Coen brothers, but anyone not familiar with their iconic filmmaking would think this movie was made by a veteran of the industry. Even being one of their earlier works, it feels like it could be from last year. It's fun to point out the classic nuances that the Coen brothers have always brought to their films, even from almost 2 decades ago. Whether it be from the humor, a man getting punched in the face each time getting his hat knocked off his head, only to be given it back by the same man delivering the punch. Or from the iconography, whether it be money, a classic staple of a Coen brother movie, which usually symbolizes greed, or the sudden jarring spurts of violence of which Miller's Crossing has no shortage of. The Coen brothers have always had the skill to craft an amazing story, and they've only fine-tuned that incredible talent over the years. Although this movie was a critical success, it suffered in the box office. My speculation is because Goodfellas came out in the same month, and people probably thought this was a rip-off or a run-of-the-mill gangster film that couldn't possibly be as good as Scorsese's flick, plus it was coming from a pair of fairly new directors, but boy would those thoughts be more than wrong. Miller's Crossing is not only a lavish and complex gangster movie, that matches the likes of Goodfellas or Casino, but one that breathes new life into the bloated genre. Set amidst the gritty backdrop of Prohibition-era America, this movie oozes with authenticity, from the smooth, narcissistic dialect of the leading gangsters, to the clothing and set design. Miller's Crossing nails the atmosphere from the get-go, with a score just as fitting and a premonition of a later Coen brothers film, Fargo. Our story centers around an Irish mob boss Leo, Albert Finney, Aaron Brockovich, who is given an impossible choice to kill a crooked bookkeeper Bernie, John Turturro, Barton Fink, but Leo is sleeping with Bernie's sister Verna, Marcia Gay Harden, so he simply cannot do this deed. All the while Leo's right-hand man Tom, Gabriel Byrne, Hereditary, is also sleeping with Verna. While all this is happening, an underling of Leo's, Casper, John Polito, has become big enough in the mob to rival Leo and attempts to use Tom to his advantage. That's just a brief synopsis for this complex story of greed and morality. There's twists and turns aplenty, double-crossing as in any good gangster movie, some truly awesome hyper-violent shootouts, and knockout performances from the entire cast. Steve Buscemi even makes a small appearance. This is a film that was overlooked when it was released, and it definitely needs to be seen by any gangster film enthusiast out there. It packs just as much of a punch, if not more, than its constituents in much less time, proving that epic films don't need to have an epic runtime. The Coen brothers have always been master-class screenwriters, bringing themes and characters together with ease, always adding dark humor when they can, but to say Miller's Crossing is a perfect movie would be a lie. Towards the end it starts to stumble a bit with the pacing. After all the punches have been played, it almost turns stale, but luckily for the audience, the Coen brothers probably thought the same thing and let the credits roll at a perfect time. There's also some exposition that I really would have liked to see rather than just hear, but sometimes that's unavoidable with a small budget. Overall, Miller's Crossing is one of the Coen brothers' earliest and finest movies, showcasing their monster talent they have from an early stage in their career. From airtight, authentic characters set over the beautiful, atmosphere-filled streets of the Roaring Twenties, to the complexity of the story, and being able to flesh it out, developing everything naturally in less than 2 hours, although towards the end there are some small pacing issues, but nothing that greatly detracts from the drama. It's darkly funny under the tension, something the Coen brothers do with ease. Each character is memorable and the performances are stellar, the action is bloody and frantic, and it shapes up to be one of the best gangster movies of its genre, and it is criminally underrated. If you ever have the opportunity to watch Miller's Crossing, do not hesitate. It is a satisfying and rewarding watch. Miller's Crossing came as a huge surprise to me. I've been a Coen brothers fan ever since I was knocked out by Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? At least a decade ago, and every succeeding film of theirs that I saw merely added to my respect for them. When I caught up with this one in 2004, I hadn't even seen Fargo yet, but it was still clear that this one didn't meet the standards I was used to. Now that I've caught up with almost all of their films, it's still the least of them, and that's surprising because it's so consistently highly rated, by people who seem to know what they're talking about. Yet, even after a second time through, I just don't get it. To my mind, this is lower on the Coen scale than even their remake of The Lady Killers, which wasn't bad until you watch the original. The rest are generally great. The Coens are film fans who build their movies out of influences they love, and there are consistent techniques and themes that tend to run throughout all of them. They design beautifully tangled plots and write razor-sharp scripts around them with powerfully memorable dialogue. They have a talent for inventive cinematography and keep their pace quick, all driven by a dynamic major character and an astute wit. All these common characteristics are tied together by a unique sense of style that varied with each film, depending on where the influences for it originated, but that remained consistently and distinctively Coen brothers. That holds true from moment one, with Blood Simple and Raising Arizona, and it holds consistent throughout their filmography. Except for this one. In comparison to all those other films, Miller's Crossing hasn't much beyond a tangled plot, which starts out slowly and without much apparent focus but kicks in about halfway through. However, the tricks of cinematography are mostly replaced by alternating static shots of people talking. The script doesn't contain much at all in the way of humor, and finally, the dynamic major character, so ably portrayed elsewhere by George Clooney, Paul Newman, or John Goodman, is played here by Gabriel Byrne, who seems to sleepwalk through the entire movie. That worked for a befuddled role like that of Jeff Goldblum in Into the Night, but it doesn't work in a gangster flick. That sound you hear in place of the usual sparkling Coen Brothers soundtrack is James Cagney and Edward G. Robinson turning over in their graves. Without any of the dominant power that Cagney and Robinson exuded out of every pore, even before they were stars, like in The Doorway to Hell or the first half of Little Caesar, Byrne plays a similar character. He's Tom Reagan, the right-hand man of Leo Obanon, the gangster who runs whatever unknown city Miller's Crossing is set in. It's never named, but they shot it in New Orleans, amid some circumstances that could have come out of the script itself. Leo is important enough to have the mayor and the chief of police in his office, and he's important enough to shout at them to sit down. He's a tough guy, for sure, as you might expect for someone played by Albert Finney, but he's losing ground to a rising power called Johnny Casper, mostly because he's sticking by a cheap fixer called Bernie Birnbaum who's causing trouble for everyone. He's doing that because of a woman, Verna by name, who's Bernie's sister and Leo's girl. Casper calls Reagan the man who walks behind the man, who whispers in his ear, and it's a good description, given that he has telling things to whisper as Verna is Tom's girl too. Leo isn't listening too much nowadays though, and so when Tom finally lets his big secret drop, he's kicked unceremoniously out of Leo's Shenandoah club and he begins playing both ends against the middle. Obviously he has to be subtle, and Gabriel Byrne was always good at subtle, but he's really subtle here, so much so that we don't even notice. If it's all meant to be set up for him to be the calm within the storm, then great. We can happily watch John Polito rage around as Johnny Casper and John Turturro play the wild card throughout, because they're both great fun to watch, especially as Polito hangs his mouth open a lot like Brian Cox in Manhunter. But we're presumably supposed to be watching Reagan and, perhaps by design, he doesn't stay remotely consistent enough for us to get a grip on who he's supposed to be. He puts Verna down anytime he feels like it but always comes back to her. He puts on tough airs that just don't work. Sister, when I've raised hell, you'll know it, he says like a cut-rate Pacino. Yet there are points where he feels tough without trying and in fact without doing much of anything. He's clever enough to persuade both sides that he's with them 100% while playing them all for his own gain, but he isn't clever enough to avoid getting beaten up all the time. Somehow he manages to do all that persuading while hardly ever committing to anything. I'll think about it, he says, pretty much all the time to pretty much everyone. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed Miller's Crossing, I guess, but I'm amazed at its inclusion in the IMDb Top 250 when far worthier films from the same directors or starring the same actors didn't make the list. What really makes this one resonate is that it isn't artificially bumped up by fanboys the way things like X2 or Transformers can make it into the list. It's rated highly by real film fans who really appreciate this movie. They genuinely seem to care about it, raving about it not because it's a Coen film but because it appeals to them as a cinematic textbook. They talk about it like they talk about Citizen Kane, as a masterpiece of technique, to be studied and admired and, a little lower down the list, enjoyed. And, even having worked through it a second time, I just don't understand why. There are some good scenes, like the one where an inquisitive boy and his inquisitive dog find the corpse of Rugg Daniels and steal his wig, or the attack on Leo's house which is overplayed but kept under control by Albert Finney. There are some good settings, as people walk away or look up at the treetops or shoot through walls. There are some good lines, like when Verna points out that Leo is honest and has a heart and Tom replies, then it's true what they say. Opposites attract. The music by Carter Burwell is memorable and the labyrinthine twists keep us paying attention. Yet from the very beginning the picture seems wooden, with a static camera merely switching back and forth between two people talking to each other. Occasionally this approach works well, as a diversionary tactic or to illustrate distance, but mostly it makes the whole film feel empty, while every other Coen Brothers film I've seen seems full. The cast are top-notch actors but either don't seem to be trying here or seem weak and ineffective in comparison to what they've done elsewhere. Gabriel Byrne has certainly proved himself in other films, before and since, and that this is his second highest rated movie at IMDb behind only The Usual Suspects is a little insulting to the rest of his career. Albert Finney plays Leo, and while he is always crusty and solid and tough, this part fades in comparison to his stunning performances much earlier in films like Saturday Night and Sunday Morning and Tom Jones or much later in Big Fish. Marcia Gay Harden is capable, early in her career, but unsympathetic and unlikable as Verna, so much so that we can't help but wonder what two massively important figures in the city see in her. Bernie Birnbaum, who proves to be the main catalyst for most of the plot, is Coen regular John Turturro, and he's good here but again not as good as elsewhere. He was superb in Quiz Show and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? and my favorite of his many memorable roles thus far may just be the freaky one he gave in the otherwise disappointing Secret Window, perhaps the only time that Johnny Depp has ever been outshone. Steve Buscemi gets a brief but welcome appearance as a fast-talking weasel named Mink, but it's only a single scene. J.E. Freeman is memorable as Casper's sidekick Eddie Dane, a role intended for Peter Stormare but rewritten when he proved unavailable. Down at the cameo end of the credits are regular Coen names like Sam Raimi as a cop and Frances McDormand as the mayor's secretary. Above them all, John Polito shines the brightest because he's the only character who actually seems to be truly alive. He's hardly a pleasant soul, but he has a lot of opportunity to show both his good and his bad sides, and he does so in a very revealing manner. By the end of the film we know far more about Johnny Casper than we do about anyone else in the story. Nobody else seems to have a purpose, a meaning, or anything close to one, let alone any real depth, and that goes double for Tom Regan. If I'm reading the film right, which I presumably am not even close to, he proves to be so clever in manipulating everyone in the film that he ends up manipulating himself and losing track of what he's doing and why. He certainly gets the last word, but I don't think he even knows what it is. He certainly doesn't get any resolution or gain, and it would seem he gets the opposite of both. Is that the point? That it's pointless. The story was a difficult one for the Coen brothers to write, and that's telling. In fact, they apparently suffered from writer's block during the process of writing the script, so much so that they broke off to write Barton Fink, not uncoincidentally a film about a writer trying to write a screenplay while suffering from writer's block, before returning to it fresh. It's loosely based on a novel called The Glass Key, with some additional influence from Red Harvest, both books written by Dashiell Hammett, who was well known for his dense plotting and unorthodox takes on resolution. None of this seems remotely surprising, though the other films I've seen that were based on Hammett works have tended to be much more approachable and understandable. While Tom Regan orchestrates most of what goes down in this film, just as Sanjuro the bodyguard does in Kurosawa's Yojimbo, an uncredited adaptation of Red Harvest, he doesn't seem to have any discernible purpose at any point in time. Sanjuro was out for his own benefit, but we don't see that with Regan. Sometimes the paths he finds himself following reminded me of Sam Spade in The Big Sleep in their lack of focus, but this film pales in comparison with that one. Like Regan, Spade followed events and through his own actions shaped what followed, but Spade was always guided by his convictions, whether he made mistakes or not, and the joy at the conclusion is that we don't actually know whether it was the right one or not. Perhaps it doesn't matter, and perhaps the journey is the destination. Here we're not sure what either the journey or destination are, and there is no real conclusion. Miller's Crossing is not often cited these days when people talk about the Coen brothers' body of work, but I think it deserves a higher spot. The film is such a cleverly constructed story, moving at a brisk pace and never feeling its 2-hour runtime. The world of the film is so rich and layered with a backstory, and the Coens reveal only as much as we need to know to understand the story. The rest is left up the viewer to infer and ponder, which is something about the Coen brothers that I absolutely love. Tom, Gabriel Byrne, is the right hand to Leo, Albert Finney, an Irish mobster in an unnamed American small town during Prohibition. Leo owns the police and the mayor's offices and manages disputes between various entities throughout the city. A conflict has boiled up between Casper, who wants to kill the bookie Bernie, John Turturro, who has been ruining his rigged fights by leaking information. Leo is in a relationship with Bernie's sister Verna, which causes him to ignore Casper's request. Tom is worried because he sees Casper's concerns being pushed to the side as the catalyst for more significant problems. Tom is one of the Coen brothers' most complicated characters, and that is saying a lot if you do a survey of their filmography. Throughout the film, he consistently lies to and double-crosses every character. One of his most egregious lies is allowing Verna to think Tom's going to go to bat for Bernie when he speaks to Leo. But even when he has to bring the hammer down on the crooked bookie, he manages to lie to the people who expect things from Tom in this matter. Tom's hat is one of the most vital components of understanding the character, as he relies on the hat to obscure his motives. The opening credits play over his dream of being in the woods and watching his hat blow away, eventually understood as a metaphor for his armor. If you track the placement of the hat throughout the movie, every time Tom loses his hat, he's about to get a physical attack. He dreams about losing his hat while sleeping with Verna, symbolizing the vulnerability he has by becoming involved with his boss's girl. With that in mind, pay close attention to the final scene and how Tom interacts with that hat. While Gabriel Byrne does a great job playing Tom as a steely, close-to-vest stoic, John Turturro delivers something on the other end of the spectrum as Bernie. Bernie is such a slimy, rotten character and is that way from his introduction. Tom finds Bernie already in his apartment waiting for him, and two have an exchange about the bookie's problems with Casper. During this opening talk, Bernie implies that he's been involved incestuously with Verna while speaking about her as someone who uses sex to get her way. Later, Bernie emotionally manipulates Tom and then lords that over the man in a disgusting display. I don't think the Coens ever used Turturro better than they did in this picture. 1990 was a year of gangsters between Miller's Crossing, Goodfellas, and Dick Tracy, each film with a very different take and aesthetic when it came to examining the lives of people who place themselves into dire situations with dangerous people. Miller's Crossing is a movie about a quiet man amid loud, arrogant people who, while lying to them all, appears to be working for at least one party for a positive outcome. The answer to Tom's true intentions is left up in the air for the audience to ponder. Did Tom genuinely care about helping Leo? Was he always out to save his own skin? Like a good noir film, the solution to those questions doesn't come easy. In a forest clearing, a black hat dances in the wind, sometimes it almost touches the ground before another gust lifts it up again. What does it mean? Who can say? That hat is the heart of the Coen brothers' marvelous pastiche of, and tribute to, gangster films, probably the only early Coen brothers film I really like, and the one I've seen the most. The Coens, bless 'em, always liked to claim it was just a film about a man and his hat. But it's also a rewarding, complex, jet black film noir comedy about ethics and morals, with intriguingly unknowable characters. And lots of hats. Tom Regan, Gabriel Byrne, is the friend and fixer of Irish crime boss Leo O'Bannon, Albert Finney, who runs a Prohibition-era city. Cool, calm, and collected Tom is the smartest guy in the city, and a compulsive gambler with a self-destructive streak a mile wide. Leo's rival, Italian gangster Johnny Casper, John Polito, wants to whack crooked bookie Bernie Birnbaum, John Turturro, who's spreading the word on boxing matches Casper has fixed, making Bernie a packet and eating into Johnny's profit. Problem is Leo says no, because he's in love with Bernie's sister Verna, Marcia Gay Harden, very good, a ruthless femme fatale, who also happens to be sleeping with Tom. When Leo finds out, Tom finds himself in the middle of a struggle to control the city, and forced to play both ends against the middle to save his skin. Miller's Crossing is a masterpiece of pastiche. Shot with a coolly steady hand by Barry Sonnenfeld, deliberately aping classic film noir and production designed within an inch of its life to look like the perfect Hollywood idea of a 1920s-era gangster film, it's a perfect mix of everything from Hammett to Chandler to Puzo. It's a sort of hyper-remake of Hammett's The Glass Key, where a crooked boss and his fixer are split apart by a woman, but fundamentally remain loyal to each other. Everything you could expect from a classic gangster film appears, but dialed up to 11, from the grandiose design, to bullet-spraying Tommy gun ruthlessness and the bloody mess left behind. Miller's Crossing is great because, unlike those other early Coen films, it combines loving pastiche and quirky humor, with a genuinely gripping story and fully rounded, complex characters. You can enjoy it as a homage, but also on its own terms as a compelling piece of storytelling. Its sense of atmosphere is faultless, with a delightful mood of wistful regret behind all the killing that comes from Carter Burwell's pitch-perfect score, riffing brilliantly off Irish folk songs. The film is crammed with brilliant sequences, ranging from comedy, gun-toting action, and stomach-churning tension. It opens with an obvious, crowd-pleasing Godfather homage, with Casper sitting across from Leo and reading him for action. But take a listen to what Casper is talking about as he asks for the right to kill Byrne: ethics. Ethics is what the film is really about. Every character in Miller's Crossing makes a choice about their moral stand. Because, even in a world of killing and violence, man and woman gotta have a code. That's not about right and wrong, but simple rules you live by. A code is what Tom has. Superbly played by Byrne, Hollywood handsome, but world-weary with a touch of self-loathing and tired of always seeing several steps ahead of everyone else, Tom is one of the most intriguing enigmas in a Coen film. How can someone this smart be such a mess? He owes thousands to bookies and he's screwing his best friend's girl. For all his smarts, and ability to see all the plays, something he proves time and again, there is something fragile about Tom. The Coens remind us of this with their running joke of Tom being smacked about endlessly. Every major character lands a blow at some point on him. For all this, Tom very rarely fights back. Not only does he not like getting his hands dirty, there is also a sense of sadomasochistic guilt about Tom. Like he's smart enough to know he's in a dirty business, and deserves all this physical abuse. The thing that makes Tom's world work is ethics, in his case loyalty to Leo. Not even being kicked out by his furious friend changes that. Miller's Crossing has a strangely sweet bromance at the heart of it, gaining a lot from Finney and Byrne's natural chemistry and forging a relationship that's part brotherly, part father and son. Of course, a girl can't come between them. Tom's clings to his loyalty to Leo, the thing that makes him able to exist in this world, and no threat from Byrne or promise of a good deal from Casper will make him compromise. Rather he will play all of Leo's enemies, and Leo himself, off against each other, to make sure his friend emerges on top. It's all symbolized by that hat. Tom dreams about that hat dancing in the wind. His literal nightmare is losing that hat, his ethics, in the wind. In so many scenes, Tom keeps in constant contact with his hat, balancing it on his knee or rolling it around his hands. When Verna wants to grab his attention, it's the hat she steals back to her apartment. It's a physical representation of his grounding, of his contact with reality. Without the hat he's vulnerable, it's inevitably tossed away before a threat or beating. Tom's not alone, every character has their own ethics. Byrne is an appallingly mercenary, selfish, two-faced, cheating little rogue, but he's just made that way. It's nothing personal, it's how he gets ahead. Casper is obsessed with loyalty, justifying to him the amount of violence he hands out. Leo has a little boy's loyalty to old friends and family, the sort of guy shocked when bad things happen to friends but who is happy to literally shred people with a Tommy gun. Verna is out for herself, but wants to protect her brother. Even the ruthless Dane is loyal to Casper and to those he's soft on to the bitter end. All these characters justify their actions by adherence to ethical rules they've made for themselves. But only Tom is really worried about getting his hands dirty. That's something Byrne exploits in the film's pivotal, and most famous, scene as Tom is unwillingly forced to prove his new loyalty to Johnny by executing Byrne in the woods. In a tour de force by Turturro, Byrne begs, pleads and weeps for his life, urging Tom to look into your heart. It's the first, and only, decision Tom makes for sentiment in the film. Naturally, it comes back to bite him. Tom's journey in the film is perhaps to remove sentiment and heart from the equation. After all, it's all leading to a third-manish ending where our hero is left standing alone while the only person he cares about walks away. Aside from Byrne, the film is crammed with sublime performances. Finney is excellent as a big puffed-up, violent teddy bear. Polito is hilarious as a wound-up ball of violent energy and poor judgment. J.E. Freeman is terrifyingly sadistic but also strangely loyal. Harden is a nightmare image of a femme fatale, ruthless to an extreme. There is a great cameo from Buscemi as a fast-talking fixer. Best of all is Turturro, grasping, selfish, cowardly, cocky, weaselly and brilliantly amoral. It's all superbly directed by the Coens, even if sometimes their delight in shocking violence goes too far, like the childish delight in seeing bodies shredded by bullets. Not only do they get the mood perfect, but if you have any doubts about their ability to direct a set piece, take a look at Finney's masterful Danny Boy scored Shootout. Their script is also a knockout of pastiche gangster parlance, as well as building a fascinating exploration of how we use morals to justify any actions we want. Miller's Crossing is about those fatal moments where we decide whether we can justify to ourselves the actions we take and the people we have become. Or maybe it is all just about a hat. There may be no other gangster film in existence that walks the tightrope Miller's Crossing walks. On the one hand, the third film from the Coen brothers is of a piece with the 1930s gangster flicks that influenced it, full of colorful criminals and double crosses and rat-a-tat action. The dialogue is straight from Dashiell Hammett and the production design is straight from the pre-code era, a la Scarface and Little Caesar. The gangster subgenre and critical thinking on the subgenre are historically grounded in realism, unlike the mythic and symbolic trappings of the film Western, and Miller's Crossing honors that in its gritty, ruminative approach to a complex plot. It is, in short, a quintessential gangster film. The pure gangster film we've described so far is constantly in sharp discordance with the Miller's Crossing that knows it's a gangster film. Self-awareness is not a traditional quality of the gangster picture. We're supposed to be shocked when characters get riddled with bullets, not laugh at the absurdity of the manner of their demise, see above. Big hulking goons are supposed to be aces in fist fights, not whimper when they get bonked on the nose. And we're not supposed to be expending energy reading into Tofat dream symbolism during a traditional crime flick, right? In short, this is anything but a quintessential gangster film. It makes a bit of sense that the Coens would instill this duality into Crossing. Their first feature, Blood Simple, was a straight-faced neo-noir with exactly one instance of explicit self-awareness, the camera hopping over a barfly. There are no winks to the audience and the violence is truly shocking. But their second feature, Raising Arizona, accelerates the mere notion of self-awareness to its breaking point and stops just short of becoming actual metafiction. It's also technically a crime film, but here there are constant winks to the audience and the violence is rooted more in Looney Tunes than in hard-boiled crime cinema. In terms of self-awareness, Miller's Crossing is perhaps a perfect blend of the two Coen features that preceded it. All of this makes for an odd experience trying to evaluate the film critically, not that evaluating the film critically is ever anything but an odd experience with the Coen brothers. Even within their oeuvre, Crossing is championed by some critics and shrugged off by others. Christopher Orr at The Atlantic expounds on the film's self-awareness, notes Crossing's explicit references to everything from The Godfather to The Third Man and calls it a meta-gangster movie. He also ranks it as the second best Coen flick. Others were turned off by the very same self-awareness, among them Roger Ebert, who called the strengths of the film largely technical. Again, both are valid viewpoints on a film that intentionally walks the tightrope between being straight-faced and being tongue-in-cheek. The Coen's original title was The Big Head, which, if we can presume this as a reference to Gabriel Byrne's main character Tom Regan, suggests that the self-aware sheen was actually toned down throughout the life of the story. Evaluated alongside other gangster films, one can certainly understand a bitter taste left in the mouths of genre purists trying to easily pin Crossing to that particular corkboard. It doesn't fit easily, and in fact it's possible that one might even construe the more tongue-in-cheek elements as poking fun at gangster archetypes. Inside Llewyn Davis, which the Coens would make decades later, is clearly devoted to the love of American folk music, but in some ways it purposefully belittles that same tradition. Crossing, like Davis, splits the knife in respectfully representing the genre to which it ostensibly belongs. But if we return to consideration of the Coens' third film within their entire body of work, it's in the characters that we find the most interesting evolutions. The classic Coen protagonist is a goofball, to put it lightly, and a lovable idiot to state it directly. As a Coen protagonist who actually has a notable brain in his head, Tom Regan is joined only by Marge Gunderson, Fargo, Ed Tom Bell, No Country for Old Men, Matty Ross, True Grit, and possibly Eddie Mannix, Hale, Caesar, all of whom are decidedly more eccentric than Reagan. Sure, elsewhere in Crossing we have the typical ne'er-do-wells, the bombastic Johnny Casper, John Polito, the meek Mink, Steve Buscemi, the mischievous Bernie Birnbaum, John Turturro. But Reagan is frankly very un-Coen-like in how well he fits the traditional hero mold. The very first shot of Miller's Crossing is of ice clinking into a glass, whiskey being poured over it. How do you like your whiskey? Straight, no chaser, just as the original makers intended? Triple distilled, perhaps, if you're seeking a purer experience? Or maybe a modern twist, something more exciting than what whiskey drinkers have been drinking for ages? It's all still whiskey, technically. If you have your vice of choice, sure, it's tough to stray from that, but if you need a little shake-up while sticking to your guns, try Miller's Crossing straight up. When Miller's Crossing was released 30 years ago, there emerged two competing camps on the Coen brothers, who had previously written and directed the stylish 1984 neo-noir Blood Simple and the deliriously farcical 1987 comedy Raising Arizona. They were either genre craftsmen of boundless range and impeccable wit and craft, or glib, soulless pastiche artists who condescended to their characters, and to the audience at large. Though consensus has swung hard in the Coen's direction over the years, albeit not on ranked lists, which is still the surest route to an argument on social media, their work is still so fussily calibrated that it can hard to tell where the heart lies. In that respect alone, Miller's Crossing is the quintessential Coen brothers film, because they constructed it around a hero who's very much like themselves, a behind-the-scenes operator who's smarter than everyone, but whose heart is in question right to the very last shot. Perhaps that's the reason the film mostly tanked in 1990, though premiering in the shadow of Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, instantly understood as one of the great gangster dramas, probably didn't help. Apart from all the other estranging qualities of a naughtily plotted homage to Dashiell Hammett and other rarefied sources, building a film around Tom Reagan, a character unknown even to those closest to him, is close to perverse. In fact, Roger Ebert wrote a whole review of Miller's Crossing without even bringing him up. As played by Gabriel Byrne, Tom is the biggest question mark in a film that's full of them. He's a shrewd thinker, understood by friends and adversaries as a man who can see several steps ahead on the board and manipulate various parties to a cleverly orchestrated outcome. At the same time, he's riddled with flaws and contradictions, given to hard drinking and reckless gambling, casual betrayal, and an unwieldiness to pull the trigger on a hit he's responsible for arranging. Among the many references at play here, the Coens have made a version of The Godfather where Tom Hagen, Robert Duvall, the Corleone family's lawyer and fixer, is the main character. The names are even similar. It's like entering the gangster movie genre through the side door. The Coens took a long time crafting the script for Miller's Crossing, so long, in fact, that they paused for 3 weeks to spin their writer's block into their next film, Barton Fink, and the effort shows in the stylized language and Byzantine plotting, which only a few viewers can sort out entirely. In the opening scene, Leo O'Bannon, Albert Finney, the Irish mob boss who controls a Prohibition-era city, fields a complaint from Johnny Casper, John Polito, an Italian gangster who's starting to accumulate power. Casper is concerned about ethics, or ethics. He's been fixing fights like a reasonable illicit businessman, and he believes Bernie Birnbaum, John Turturro, has been snuffing them out, which changes the odds and limits his take. But Leo doesn't give Casper permission to put a hit on Bernie, despite Tom, his chief counsel, insisting that killing Bernie would prevent Casper from challenging him. We soon learn that Leo's current squeeze is Verna Birnbaum, Marcia Gay Harden, Bernie's sister, which accounts for why he wants to protect him. We soon learn that Tom is sleeping with Verna, too. That's the most basic accounting of Miller's Crossing possible. The power struggle between Leo and Casper has many other ins and outs, including the separate machinations of the Dane, J.E. Freeman, Casper's surly henchman, and fringe character like Mink LaRue, Steve Buscemi, who's variously connected to Bernie and the Dane. But for as difficult as the what of the film is to sort out, the why of a player like Tom is more puzzling still, because his motives are seemingly so obscure. Men like Leo, Casper, and Bernie are relatively straightforward, as Bernie tells Tom when he's begging for his life, "Somebody gives me an angle, I play it. I don't deserve to die for that." Tom's loyalties are up in the air. He betrays his boss, but protects him, too. He's cold to Verna, but loves her, too. In the end, he seems to have carefully planned his own isolation. In the meantime, the Coens have a wonderful time playing in this particular toy box. Starting with Casper's opening monologue about ethics, the Coens make a running joke out the honor among thieves theme. To Casper, fixing fights is sound business, but double-crossing is absolutely unseemly. Double-crossing is Bernie's lifeblood. I used a little information for a chisel. It's my nature, Tom, but bumping guys off? That's what animals do. In this world, ethics runs a distant second to the accumulation of power, and allegiances are temporary and transactional. The mayor and the police chief will serve at the disposal of whoever sits on the throne. As an exercise in style, Miller's Crossing puts a fine polish on the hardwood interiors of the offices and social clubs where gangsters do business, and luxuriates in period wardrobe and hair, which are like an outward reflection of inward calculation. Just the way Verna swings open a door in chestnut lingerie tells a story in itself. The Coens also uncork a few of their finest sequences, like Leo defending his burning home from Casper's Tommy gun-bearing goons as Danny Boy blares on the soundtrack, or Bernie pleading for his life in a forest clearing, sensing Tom's reluctance to get his hands dirty. There's no question they're showing off a little. A sequence where Leo peppers an assailant with machine gun fire sparked its own mini controversy, but the dialogue alone has such a pleasing musicality that it hardly matters. Do the Coens mean any of this? Is there any authentic feeling in Miller's Crossing, or is it just a couple of wiseacres trying on period garb for size? That question has persistently dogged the film for 30 years, but the Coens have never been ones for easy sentiment. Tom is the man who wasn't there before the man who wasn't there, and the fact that he's hard to read doesn't make him unreadable or not worth reading. He cares, as do the Coens. You just have to squint a little to see it. Vastly celebrated for its complicated story and innovative take on elements of film noir, Miller's Crossing is the Coen brothers' third feature, and one of their most outstanding. The film is one of the Coens' features that retain a serious tone throughout, and it provides an entertaining yet incredibly well-crafted story of violence and deceit. Tough guy Tom Reagan, Gabriel Byrne, has found his place working as the right hand of Irish mobster Leo O'Bannon, Albert Finney, whom he counsels about the right ways of handling things. Known all around for his hard character and silent ways, Tom finds himself in a tight spot when trying to make his boss see that the woman he loves, Verna, Marcia Gay Harden, is using him only for the ensured protection of her own brother Bernie, John Turturro. Bernie is in trouble with a rival gang, and when Leo discovers the relationship between Verna and Tom, he banishes Tom from his circle. Driven by fierce loyalty to Leo, and the necessity to survive, Tom must find a way to infiltrate a rival mob in the hope of discovering a way to set things right with Leo and buy himself some peace of mind. Tom could be considered the hero of the film, but he is certainly not the most pleasant character. Hypermasculine and rugged, the part is played to perfection by Gabriel Byrne. Like most Coen films, Miller's Crossing is filled with a masculine cast that is successful in its depiction of an unapologetic, violent group of mobsters. Marcia Gay Harden stands out as Verna, not only for her beauty, but for the grit of her character amongst an all-male cast. Like other Coen women, Verna is both beautiful and deadly, and the rest of the characters and actors in the film do not outshine her. It is refreshing to see how, despite Verna being a plot device, she does not become a wallflower, and her interactions are always eye-catching and well delivered. The film boasts a vast cast, and many characters compose the complicated relations in which Tom seems to be immersed. A masterful show of directing proves the Coen's strict control on these exchanges, and all of the acting is on the same level, providing a congruent and pleasant experience. Miller's Crossing is one of those films that demands attention. As with many gangster films, everybody has a hidden agenda, and the story is a complicated collection of agreements and double crossings. This strategy keeps things very interesting, and the Coens create a maze of situations where there are multiple possible outcomes of which the spectator may be thinking. Trying to figure out future twists is difficult, but also provides strong immersion and interest with the film that makes the viewing experience interesting and enjoyable. Regardless of its smart scenarios, however, the film does drag on. Although length is important for the double-crossing dynamic Tom finds himself in, there are times where it feels as if matters should just be settled and done with. This stagnation creates a type of disconnect with the story, and causes the action to lose its momentum. The story is undeniably well crafted, but the duration can seem like a bit of a drag. The viewer, however, must decide whether the length is a blessing or a curse. Either way, the film has high rewards for a fan of film, and is worth watching regardless of its flaws. The third film from the Coen brothers, Miller's Crossing, has a tone similar to the noir gangster films popular in the 1930s and 40s. It follows the relationship between city boss Leo Obanon, Albert Finney, and right-hand man Tom Reagan, Gabriel Byrne. Boss Obanon has a rival in the city, Italian mobster boss Johnny Casper, John Polito, who in the opening monologue tries to get Obanon to kill slimy Bernie, John Turturro, for double-crossing him. To complicate matters, the boss is in love with Bernie's sister Verna, Marcia gay Harden, and promised her he would protect him. To add more complications, Tom is having a secret affair with Verna, and after his boss finds out, he befriends the Italian gang and in a twist is ordered to kill Bernie in the woods at Miller's Crossing. What follows is double crosses, violent killings and assassination attempts, all done in the offbeat style that the Coens have become famous for. The film is excellent in many ways, from the snappy dialogue, great cinematography by Barry Sonnenfeld, and great performances from all involved. Highlights include the opening scene and the amazingly shot and edited hit attempt on the boss at his mansion, great use of the song Danny Boy. Also, look out for nice cameos by Steve Buscemi and director Sam Raimi. The film centers on Tom, who is a man who does not know what he wants in life and just seems lonely. It's a great performance from Gabriel Byrne, and the banter between him and Albert Finney shows you the mutual respect they have for each other. John Turturro also stands out as Slimeball Bernie, an amazing performance with him being nasty in one scene and crying and begging for his life in the next. The bleak green and brown tones of the film match the gloomy feel of the portrait of the characters. This film shows the maturity of the Coen's directorial style and stands up very well today, and it is very much worth revisiting. This film, directed by Joel Coen, written by Joel Coen, Ethan Coen, produced by Ethan Coen, starring Gabriel Byrne, cinematography Barry Sonnenfeld, edited by Michael R. Miller. Music by Carter Burwell. Production company Circle Films. Distributed by 20th Century Fox. Release date September 21, 1990. Running time 115 minutes. Country United States. Language English. Budget $10 to $14 million. Box office $5 million.